Hello guys, welcome to my channel where stories filled with revenge, moral lessons, and love are told. If you enjoy this story, don't forget to like, share it with your friends, and subscribe for more. I had always thought I'd be prepared for the day my daughter, Marissa, told me she wanted to get married. I raised her on my own after her mother passed away when she was just a teenager. Life wasn't easy for us, but she never went without love, guidance, or the values I held close to my heart. Respect, humility, and hard work. As a war veteran turned mechanic, I believed in earning every penny through sweat and persistence. That was the life I built for her, a foundation I thought she'd always carry. But when she introduced me to Damien, something inside me stirred uneasily. At first glance, he looked polished, smooth, confident. The kind of man who grew up never knowing the weight of a calloused hand. His charm rolled off him like perfume, thick and deliberate. On social media, he paraded luxury cars, vacation yachts, and dinner plates worth more than my monthly earnings. Every caption screamed of wealth and status, of superiority cloaked in designer suits. I tried not to judge too quickly. Maybe he was simply showing off the blessings life had given him. After all, Marissa looked at him with that kind of sparkle I hadn't seen in her eyes since childhood. Who was I to question her happiness? Still, deep down, I couldn't shake the thought that Damien was more concerned with appearances than with character. My unease sharpened one evening when we gathered at a small Italian restaurant in the city. Marissa had asked me to meet Damien properly, and though I dreaded the idea, I agreed. I showed up in my work shirt, sleeves still smudged faintly with oil stains I hadn't noticed earlier. As I slid into the booth across from them, Damien's eyes flicked down at my shirt and then back up, carrying a smile that wasn't really a smile at all. It was the kind of grin that assessed, measured, and dismissed all at once. The dinner began pleasantly enough. Marissa talked about wedding plans, flowers, the menu, the guest list. I watched her hands move excitedly as she spoke, her joy spilling across the table like warm sunlight. I tried to focus on that joy, to let it drown out the gnawing discomfort settling in my chest. But Damien couldn't leave the silence alone for long. "So Caleb," he began, swirling his glass of wine like it was part of a performance. "Marissa tells me you own. What is it again? A garage? That's noble work. Very salty of the earth." His voice stretched the word noble until it nearly broke under sarcasm. I shifted slightly, keeping my face steady. "I reparations," I replied. "Been doing it for over 20 years. Keeps food on the table and cars on the road." "Of course," he said, nodding like he was humoring a child. "Though it must be exhausting. I can't imagine spending my days hunched over engines when there are easier ways to make a living. Stocks, real estate, technology, industries that actually move the world forward." The words sank like stones. I looked at my daughter, hoping she caught the sting in his voice, but she only smiled nervously and tried to redirect. "Damien, Dad's work is important. He's always been proud of it." "Of course, darling," Damien said smoothly, laying his hand on hers. "I just mean, well, I hope Caleb won't mind that our worlds are a little different. After all, you deserve more than greasy hands and late-night shifts, don't you?" Something hot surged inside me, a mixture of anger and wounded pride. But years of discipline kept me calm. I set down my fork and leaned back, meeting his eyes with quiet steel. "Work is work, Damien. It's not the kind of job that defines a man's worth, but the honesty he brings to it." His smile didn't falter, but I could see the dismissive flicker in his gaze, like my words were quaint relics from another era. He changed the subject quickly after that, asking Marissa about honeymoon destinations, dropping names of exclusive resorts and private islands as if they were everyday choices. I sat there feeling smaller with every passing minute, not because of his wealth, but because of the way he wielded it like a weapon. He made me feel like an antique in my own daughter's life, something old-fashioned and obsolete. But through it all I stayed quiet. I watched Marissa beam at him, her laughter filling the restaurant, and I reminded myself that her happiness mattered more than my pride. When the check arrived, Damien insisted on paying, of course. He pulled out a platinum card with a flourish, glancing at me as though waiting for some acknowledgement. I simply nodded, letting him have his show. It didn't matter who covered dinner. What mattered was the way he'd tried to shrink me in front of my daughter. that cut deeper than any financial gesture. As we walked out into the cool night air, Marissa hugged my arm and whispered, "Thank you for coming, Dad. I know it means a lot to Damien." I forced a smile and kissed her forehead. "Anything for you, sweetheart." But inside, I carried a heaviness. I couldn't shake the feeling that Damien wasn't just arrogant, he was dangerous to her spirit. He wanted to rewrite the meaning of respect, of love, of family. And though I bit my tongue that night, I knew this story wasn't finished. The day of the wedding arrived, and though I had promised myself to focus only on Marissa's happiness, my heart carried a storm. I woke before dawn, staring at the ceiling of my modest home, listening to the faint ticking of the clock on my nightstand. My chest felt heavy, not with sorrow, but with the uneasy knowledge that I was walking into a world that Damien had painted in his own colors, shiny, sharp, and built for spectacle. By noon, I found myself dressed in the best suit I owned, one I had worn only a handful of times since my military discharge. It wasn't designer or new, but it was clean pressed, and it carried the weight of many memories, parades, memorials, and even Marissa's high school graduation. I stood in front of the mirror for a long time, tightening my tie, reminding myself that today wasn't about me. It was about my daughter, and no amount of unease about her choice could take away the love I felt as I prepared to watch her take this step. The church ceremony was beautiful. Marissa glowed in her white gown, walking down the aisle like a vision I never thought I'd see. I tried to hold back my tears, but one slipped free when she smiled at me just before saying her vows. She was radiant, trembling with joy, and for a moment I almost forgot about Damien. Almost. But the reception brought reality back with a vengeance. It was held in one of the city's most luxurious hotels, the kind of place where crystal chandeliers sparkled like frozen rain and waiters moved in silence, carrying trays of delicacies I couldn't even name. Every table was decorated with towering arrangements of roses and orchids, and the air smelled faintly of expensive perfume and polished marble. Guests dressed like royalty filled the hall, their conversations rising and falling like waves. I found my seat at a table near the front, reserved for family. I sat between two of Marissa's cousins, feeling both proud and out of place, like a soldier at a gala where he didn't belong. Damien moved through the crowd with ease, shaking hands, kissing cheeks, and flashing his perfect smile at anyone who looked his way. He was in his element, thriving under the weight of attention. For a while, I stayed quiet, sipping water and watching Marissa glow as she greeted guests, her laughter carrying above the music. My heart softened at the sight of her happiness, and I thought maybe, just maybe, I could learn to live with Damien's arrogance if it meant seeing her smile like that. But then it happened. Dinner was being served, and everyone began taking their seats. I rose from my chair to get a plate from the buffet, careful to move slowly with my old knee injury. When I returned, I held my plate in one hand and reached for the back of my chair with the other. But just as I began to lower myself down, the chair vanished. In an instant, I was on the ground, my plate crashing into my chest and scattering food across the polished floor. The hall went silent. Every laugh, every note of music, every clink of a glass stopped at once. I looked up, stunned, and there stood Damien smirking, his hand still clutching the chair he had yanked away from me. "Careful there, Caleb," he said loudly enough for everyone to hear. "Didn't want you to hurt yourself. These chairs are a little unstable, you know." Laughter erupted across the room. Some guests covered their mouths, others laughed openly, and the sound cut through me like a blade. My face burned with shame as I struggled to rise, my knee throbbing from the fall. Damien made no move to help me. Instead, he slid the chair back into place with exaggerated politeness, as though mocking me further. Marissa rushed to my side, her eyes wide with horror. "Dad, are you okay?" She bent to help me up, her voice shaking. "I'm fine," I muttered, brushing crumbs from my suit, though inside I felt anything but fine. My pride, my dignity, my very place in that room had been stripped from me in front of everyone I knew and many I didn't. Damien laughed again, this time clapping a nearby groomsman on the shoulder, as if it were all a harmless prank. "Come on, everyone, lighten up. It's just a bit of fun. Caleb's a tough guy, aren't you? A veteran can take a little fall." But I saw it in his eyes. It wasn't fun to him. It was deliberate. It was cruel. He had been waiting for the perfect opportunity to humiliate me, and he found it in front of hundreds of witnesses on the day meant to honor my daughter. I lowered myself carefully into the chair, forcing my hands to stay steady even as they trembled with rage. The whispers began to spread across the room, sharp as needles. I could hear them, feel them, though no one dared say them aloud. The mechanic. The old soldier. Out of place. For the rest of dinner I stayed quiet, chewing food I couldn't taste, my ears burning from the echo of laughter that still hung in the air. Marissa squeezed my hand under the table, her face pale, her smile forced as she tried to salvage the night. My heart ached for her, but I could not ease the weight pressing against my chest. I wanted to leave. I wanted to stand, walk out of that glittering hall and never look back. But I stayed for her. I stayed because my daughter deserved to have her father by her side, even if her husband-to-be had just torn me down before her eyes. And yet, in that moment of humiliation, I felt something stir inside me. Not just anger but a kind of quiet resolve. Damien thought he had written the story of that evening. He thought he had reduced me to nothing more than a joke, a relic to be laughed at. But stories don't end in humiliation. Not mine. Not tonight. The silence after my humiliation lingered in the air like a foul odor. I tried to drown myself in the clinking of glasses and the cheerful music that eventually returned, but my ears still carried the echo of laughter. I forced myself to sit straight, to hold my fork with dignity, and to answer politely when guests asked if I was all right. Inside, however, I burned. I had been mocked in front of my daughter, stripped of the respect I had earned in a single, calculated moment. Marissa's hand never left mine under the table. Every so often she would glance at me with a look of apology, though she had done nothing wrong. I wanted to tell her I was fine, that nothing could break me, but my lips refused to shape the words. I felt like a soldier who had been ambushed, forced to retreat in shame, not because he lacked strength, but because the battlefield was tilted against him. Then, just as dessert was being served, the doors at the back of the hall swung open. A hush fell across the room again, not from my presence this time, but because Damien's parents had finally arrived. I had never met them before. They had flown in from abroad, their arrival delayed by some business engagement. When they entered, dressed in tailored elegance that screamed of wealth, the crowd parted for them as though royalty had arrived. Damien straightened immediately, his chest swelling with pride. He hurried to greet them, kissing his mother's cheek and shaking his father's hand with the kind of rehearsed affection that seemed more performance than genuine. The guests watched, murmuring with admiration at the family's presence. Victor, Damien's father, was a tall man with streaks of silver in his hair and eyes that scanned the room like a general inspecting his troops. He carried himself with quiet authority, the kind that did not need loudness to command attention. His gaze swept across the tables, pausing briefly on faces, until finally it landed on me. I expected the same dismissive look I had received from his son weeks earlier at the diner, but what I saw instead was shock. His eyes widened, his mouth parted slightly, and for a moment he looked as though he were staring at a ghost. He walked toward me, ignoring Damien's chatter, ignoring the crowd, ignoring the curious whispers. His steps were steady, deliberate, until he stopped right in front of my chair. "Caleb." His voice broke slightly, carrying disbelief. "Sergeant Caleb Donovan?" The entire hall froze. Conversation stopped mid-sentence. Forks hovered in midair. I blinked up at him, caught off guard. "Yes," I said slowly. "That's me." Victor's face changed in an instant. Emotion flooded him with gratitude, relief, and something else I couldn't quite name. He reached out, grasping my shoulders with both hands. "My God. It's you. You're the man who saved my life in Fallujah. You dragged me out from under that burning vehicle when everyone else thought I was gone." His voice cracked, echoing across the silent room. Gasps filled the hall. Guests leaned forward, whispering fiercely to one another. My daughter's eyes widened in shock, tears welling at the corners. And Damien's face went pale, his jaw dropping as if the ground beneath him had shifted. Victor didn't care about the stares. He pulled me to my feet and embraced me tightly. "I have prayed for years that I would meet you again," he said, his voice thick. "I owe you everything. My life, my family, my son. Without you, none of this would exist." The hall erupted in murmurs. The same crowd that had laughed at me earlier now watched with reverence. I stood stiffly, unsure how to react to such raw gratitude. I had carried that memory of war like a scar, never expecting recognition. To me, it had been duty, nothing more. But now in this glittering hall, it became something greater. Victor turned to the crowd, his voice strong. Do you know who this man is? He is a hero. While others sought shelter, he faced fire. While others hesitated, he carried me from death. And tonight you laugh at him. His eyes flashed, settling on his son. Damien looked like a child caught stealing, shrinking under his father's gaze. I didn't mean. You didn't mean? Victor's voice boomed. You humiliated the very man who gave you life by saving mine. Without him, you wouldn't stand here in that suit, parading your arrogance. The silence that followed was crushing. Damien's mother placed a hand over her mouth, her eyes darting between her husband and her son. Marissa's lips trembled as she looked from me to Damien, horror dawning across her face. Then, in the most unexpected moment of all, Damien sank to his knees before me. His polished shoes scuffed against the marble floor as he bowed his head. I'm sorry, he whispered, his voice shaking. I thought I was better. I thought money and status mattered more than anything else. But I see now how wrong I was. Please forgive me for what I did to you, for how I treated you, for humiliating you. I stood frozen, my hands trembling slightly. Every eye in the room was on me, waiting for my response. I could have rejected him. I could have let him stew in his shame, let him carry the weight of his cruelty for the rest of his life. Revenge whispered in my ear, sweet and tempting. But then I looked at Marissa. My daughter, whose tears spilled silently down her cheeks, was torn between the man she loved and the father she cherished. My heart softened. She deserved peace, not bitterness. I placed a hand on Damien's shoulder. Stand up, I said gently. He lifted his head, his eyes glistening with humiliation and relief. You made a mistake. You let pride blind you. But if you truly mean those words, if you truly want to change, then I forgive you. Not because you deserve it right now, but because my daughter deserves a husband who will learn humility. The hall exhaled as though it had been holding its breath. Victor nodded approvingly, pride softening his stern expression. Marissa threw her arms around me, whispering, Thank you, Dad. Damien rose slowly, his eyes never leaving mine, as though silently promising he would never forget that moment. The rest of the reception shifted. Conversations turned from whispers to admiration. Guests approached me, not with pity this time, but with respect. I no longer felt like the outsider at that glittering table. I felt like a man whose dignity had been restored, not by revenge, but by truth revealed at the right time. Later that evening, as I watched Marissa and Damien dance, I allowed myself a small smile. Life had a strange way of writing stories. I had walked into that hall humiliated, but I walked out with something far greater. My honor, my daughter's love, and the promise of a future where character mattered more than wealth. And as I left the reception, the city lights glowing outside the hotel windows, I realized that sometimes, redemption doesn't come with anger or bitterness. Sometimes it comes quietly, when the truth finally demands to be seen. Moral lesson. Life has a way of revealing what lies beneath the surface. Pride, arrogance, and wealth can dazzle for a time, but they crumble when tested against the strength of character, humility, and sacrifice. My story is not about falling to the ground at a wedding reception. It is about standing back up, not with rage but with dignity intact. True revenge is not shouting nor striking back. It is letting the truth speak louder than humiliation. We live in a world where people often measure worth by what can be flaunted on screens, in bank accounts, or in glittering halls. But real worth is quieter. It's in the sacrifices made when no one is watching. It's in kindness, in courage, in choosing forgiveness when vengeance seems easier. So let this story be a reminder. Character is the greatest inheritance we can give, and the strongest foundation we can build. Don't let others define your value. Stand firm in who you are. For the truth has a way of finding its voice when the moment is right. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to like, subscribe, share with friends, and drop a comment about the lesson you learned.